There are a lot of weird things that make up a modern day Pokemon Sword and Shield speedrun. For example, you could grab one of those competitively viable legendary horses everyone uses in an hour. You can use your entire allowance your mother gives you on a banger shirt to flex your allowance on her. Real speedrun, by the way. You can do the weird post game and beat up these two idiots. But oddly enough, I actually think the weirdest of them all is the generic beat the game speedrun. For one, it's the only Pokemon game where you have 5 extremely different ways to reach the game's credits. But with so many options available to us, I imagine a couple questions come to mind, like, what is actually the fastest way to play? Why the game speedrun is split into so many different categories, and where do things get weird? Let's first start this weirdness by explaining the full structure of a Pokemon Sword and Shield speedrun. Hey, you're probably sitting down to watch this video, right? Are you comfy? Be honest, because you could be even more comfy on a beautiful chair from Flexispot. You see my old chair here? It's awful. I had to use an old nasty pillow that kept falling down just to feel comfortable. The moment I was introduced to the C7 Morpher from Flexispot, it was like picking a starter Pokemon for the first time as I sat upon my new throne. It felt like no matter what angle my journey took them through, that I would hardly have to adjust as I moved onwards. I guess in this case, to my desk instead of a Pokemon gym or something. But look, I'm not exaggerating when I say that the C7 Morpher is phenomenal. You can adjust the headrest to so many degrees and keep that neck nice and comfy for hours. The upper and lower back support hugs you like they mean something to you. If you're a short king or a tall emperor, you can put yourself in the perfect spot on the amazing seat cushion. I can even do this with their seat's leg rest as I recline backwards for what will be a glorious nap time for me. And I guess when I decide to actually work on this video, I can swivel these amazing cushiony armrest in just the right way that my wrist will experience that same comfort, making the strain from PC gaming a thing of the past. It's seriously awesome, and if you're looking for a new chair that'll exceed those expectations, head over to their website and use my code in the description for the best price for either the C7 or C5 chairs, both of which are incredible quality, can work for your budget, and come with a 30-day return policy and a 10-year warranty for any damaged parts. In both Pokemon Sword and Shield, you gotta grab 8 badges, but 2 of those badges are different depending on what game you play. All because Pokemon Sword and Shield have version-exclusive gym leaders, which creates a huge shift in who is the best Pokemon to speedrun with in those respective games. And to reinforce that shift even more, version-exclusive Pokemon are also a massive factor in this, creating a very unique path for both games from the moment you meet Leon, make it past the gyms, go into a giant tournament full of trainers you met along the way, then face unexpected villains, the battle against Eternatus, and one final battle against the champion Leon. However, there is yet another shift in the way we play out Pokemon Sword and Shield speedruns that creates one more unique scenario for both games involving the DLC, creating a total of 5 different ways you can beat Pokemon Sword and Shield as fast as possible. So, what is the fastest way to do it then? Well, in order from fastest to slowest, playing on a Nintendo Switch 2 is without a doubt the fastest way to play the game. What you might find weird is how going straight into the Crown Tundra DLC and spending a bunch of time inside of Dynamax Adventures is the fastest way to beat both Pokemon Sword and Shield on Switch 1 and 2. And the thing that makes this weird is that it takes 15 minutes to do everything you need to do to get a Dynamax Adventures Pokemon, with things like die to Peony on purpose, picking a fast path to clear it, then catching a Dynamax Adventures Pokemon is still somehow faster. Because the fact of the matter is that the levels of these Dynamax monsters is ridiculous. And using the DLC like this makes pretty much every battle from this point forward a joke. You literally crush everything. Save time on earning experience and levels that you would normally earn using anything non-DLC related, never really have to set up to power up your Pokemon until the very end of the game. So despite the nasty investment you have to make to get there, what you get out of it in return saves so much time that it beats the game 6 to 7 minutes faster than not using the DLC, which is exactly why we had to make it its own category on speedrun.com, making things a lot more fun and accessible without forcing a paywall just to start speedrunning. Unless of course you want to compete on the Switch too, but let's not go there just yet, because so much of the weird stuff we got going on is actually tied to the Nintendo Switch 1 version of Pokemon Sword and Shield speedruns. So just to acknowledge the elephant in the room, I imagine a lot of you came to watch this video from the thumbnail, and I'm here to tell you it's not clickbait whatsoever. because the Nintendo Switch 1 is a surprisingly laggy console for not just games like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. It's literally all the Nintendo Switch 1 Pokemon games. And the reason we know this for Pokemon Sword and Shield in particular is because a speedrunner one day decided to play this game in airplane mode and found a surprising amount of time saved from it, enough to where we can now beat Pokemon Sword and Shield faster than the fastest patch ever released for the game. Just a bit of relevant history on that. When Pokemon Sword and Shield was first given patches to prepare for the first ever DLC for the game, it actually made the game surprisingly slower by about a minute or two from things like lag you get from entering your bag. And because the Nintendo Switch 1 doesn't have a proper way to revert to a previous patch, we couldn't do anything about it for years. That is, until airplane mode was given to us as a solution to some of the lag. So the reason why this saves time in the first place is because Sword and Shield have features like showing other players in your overworld when you're online. But since the game is always trying to assess and get those features to play out, even if you don't have your Switch connected to the internet, it probably lags the game too, which is why using airplane mode instead of deleting your internet connection is the definitive solution. However, this didn't exactly save the entire minute we lost to lag from patches, as it apparently only saves a subtle 15 or so seconds. But if you're a shiny hunter getting encounters all the time for hours, this is absolutely something you want to use for your hunts. That just adds up to a lot of crazy time save. Back on topic though, I didn't forget about speedruns here and the ever-growing list of weird stuff, like not being subscribed to the channel. Why did I write this? This segue's awful. Whatever. What this was going to say was how version-exclusive Pokemon affect what is the fastest Pokemon we use in a speedrun. So if you've never watched a Pokemon speedrun before, you might not know that the most common solution to most Pokemon games is to just use the starter Pokemon, which used to be the case for Pokemon Sword and Shield speedruns without the DLC. But nowadays, both the Sword and Shield routes are quite distinct from one another. Pokemon Shield, for example, has access to the version-exclusive Growlithe. Without powerful Arcanine is as a Pokemon, going out of your way to encounter and catch Growlithe, walk super far to grab a Firestone, then evolve and reteach it a crazy amount of moves is the best and fastest way to clear the early sections of Shield. Even against folks like the Water Gym leader Nessa, using creative strategies and moves like Burnout to make Arcanine typeless, then with just enough setup and getting into low HP, we can use Reversal to obliterate her. However, things get a bit more convoluted as time goes on in the route, as we grab Drillbur to clear everything after the 5th gym badge. Because just like Pokemon Sword and Shield DLC speedruns, going out and catching even more powerful Pokemon instead of brute forcing the game with a starter is just outright faster thanks to Excadrill's raw power, speed, and move pool. But what if I told you that I saved the weirdest version of the Pokemon Sword and Shield any % speedrun for last? Because the Pokemon Sword speedrun route makes the least amount of sense as to why it's faster than just outright using a starter, and is somehow even faster than the methods used for Pokemon Shield 2. So get this, we start the run as usual. We pick our starter, beat up Hop, then abandon your starter Score Bunny for a Vulpix, who then grabs that super far Firestone to evolve it into a Ninetales. Now this probably already sounds very similar to the Shield route. What makes it different is we stay for an extra Pokemon, Minccino, which obviously is such a big deal to have gotten that we gotta throw it straight into our PC. I promise I'm not leading you all on with this little guy, by the way, either. He just needs to stay in the PC with the other Pokemon for a really cool Pokemon Sword and Shield time-saving trick, where we purposely have a single Pokemon in our party, faint them as fast as possible, and are then teleported to an NPC that asks us if we want to be teleported to the next destination, Motostoke City, so that we save time on the giant walk all the way there. It's also the reason why grabbing the Firestone isn't that much of a time waster either, because we can do it more than once to get to the city, to get closer to the Firestone, then to go right back to the city once again. And to add on to this fun laundry list of time save, since we only have one Pokemon in our party, we can skip every non-mandatory double battle we see in the overworld to save time in places like going into Nessa's town. Then once you actually reach Nessa's town is where the magic of Minccino graces us with a trade. A trade for our brand new main battler, Candy Floss the Cottony. A Pokemon which is notoriously good for competitive Pokemon when fully evolved and is just as amazing for speedruns. But despite it only having a 7 77 base special attack, its coverage, guaranteed modest nature, 15 IVs across the board, and a trade Pokemon EXP bonus sets it up to be a monster when combined with Ninetales as a partner. But obviously, all this power comes with the responsibility of needing a Sunstone to evolve it to its final form. And the fastest one you can obtain requires you to fly back to Motostoke and bike super far into the wild area. So with all these detours in mind, I imagine you might be wondering how starter Pokemon could possibly be slower since you could just grab them and go. Well, a big part of the appeal of Candy Floss in comparison to the fastest story clearing starter Sobble is the fact that you don't need to reset for God stats or good nature. And while its final evolution Inteleon does have a much better base stat than Candy Floss, the consistency is a big factor for Candy Floss's success, letting folks develop strategies good enough to overtake Sobble for the last few years. But I think the biggest culprit to Sobble's downfall is mostly the little things that add up to be way bigger time loss, like having to set up and Dynamax a lot more than Candy Floss to KO opponents, having to talk to NPCs in weird places for super specific moves like Rain Dance and Water Pledge, and the fact that Sobble's move pool is just naturally really bad, as it's forced to use water moves on just about everything that stands in its way. If only those precious TMs that make it better weren't locked behind the post game. But either way, I adore the fact that using Candy Floss is just both silly, easy to get into, and makes the speedrun way more fun and healthy for us speedrunners. However, some of the quirkiness of Sword and Shield is a bit lost when we take a look at the Nintendo Switch version of the runs, because unfortunately, Airplane mode apparently no longer saves time on the Nintendo Switch 2, taking away one unique thing that is only present for time save in Pokemon Sword and Shield. Literally no other Pokemon game saves time like that on the Switch 1. While things like Airplane mode might be gone on the Nintendo Switch 2, nothing can ever take away the beauty that makes up for Pokemon Sword and Shield speedruns. A game that started off with a very troubled history in and out of Pokemon speedrunning, but ended up finding a unique spot to diversify itself more than any other game that's ever been created for our amazing community. A history which you can check out by watching this video here. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and much love to my awesome supporters on Patreon.